The rain had just begun to fall when Mr. Daniels stepped through the front doors of Jefferson High, his shoes clicking against the polished floor with a quiet confidence. He wore a simple gray blazer, slightly wrinkled, and carried an old leather briefcase that looked like it had been with him through more than one storm. His eyes scanned the long hallway lined with lockers, most of them covered in stickers, chipped paint, and the graffiti of teenagers trying to make themselves heard in a world that rarely listened. Room 108. That was his classroom. He paused outside the door, took a breath, and opened it. Inside, 25 students sat scattered across the room, slouched in chairs, scrolling on phones, whispering under their breath. The air carried that heavy mix of stale air conditioning and adolescent indifference. One kid in the back cracked his knuckles and grinned at his friend. Another blew a bubble with her gum and let it pop loud enough to get attention. A group of 3 boys near the windows locked eyes with each other when Mr. Daniels entered, the kind of silent communication honed over years of pulling pranks and testing boundaries. "Great." Another one of them muttered, not quietly enough. Mr. Daniels smiled gently and walked to the desk at the front, placing his briefcase down with care, as if it contained something precious. He didn't speak right away. He just looked around the room, meeting eyes without fear, without judgment. A few students looked away quickly, uncomfortable with the calm in his gaze. It wasn't the usual awkward fumbling of a nervous substitute or the sharp tone of someone trying too hard to establish dominance. This was something different. And it unnerved them. One of the ringleaders, a tall boy with a buzz cut and a reputation for making teachers cry before Christmas break, leaned back in his chair and whispered, "Bet I can break him before lunch." His friend snorted. "Before second period." Mr. Daniels didn't flinch. He heard them, but he gave no reaction. Instead, he opened his briefcase, pulled out a worn notebook, and began writing something quietly at his desk. No "good morning." No roll call. No desperate plea for attention. Whispers turned into murmurs. What's he doing? Is he even gonna teach? Maybe he's mute. Someone tossed a crumpled paper ball at the chalkboard. It bounced off with a dull thud. Still, no reaction. A girl with dyed blue hair leaned over to her friend. He's either really smart, or completely clueless. And in the back corner, those 3 boys exchanged a nod. The plan was unspoken, but understood. Mr. Daniels was the next target. The last teacher lasted 6 weeks. The one before that, barely 2. The record was 3 days. They thrived on it, pushing, poking, testing until the cracks showed. If you cracked, you were done. Mr. Daniels finally stood, walked to the center of the room, and began writing on the board. The students quieted just enough to see what he'd write. But instead of his name or the day's lesson, he wrote a question. What do you wish someone knew about you, but you're too afraid to say? No one moved. No one spoke. The bell hadn't even rung yet. The morning dragged on with a strange tension. Mr. Daniels didn't raise his voice, didn't call on anyone at random, and didn't demand silence. He simply taught, as if he wasn't surrounded by students waiting for him to trip. His calm unnerved them more than any strict rule ever had. But the ringleaders in the back, Tyler, Malik, and Jordan, weren't interested in patience. They had a reputation to maintain. And nothing was more fun than turning a new teacher into a public joke. They waited until second period. That's when Mr. Daniels wheeled out the old school projector, its humming fan and scratched surface practically begging to be part of a prank. He set up a short presentation for the class. Something about empathy and the power of perspective. A lesson in kindness, he called it. He handed the flash drive to Jordan without a second thought, asking him to plug it into the class computer. Jordan grinned, already in position. The night before, they had snuck into the system using a shared student login and swapped out Mr. Daniels' original file with something else, something designed to break him in front of everyone. It was a grotesque slideshow filled with cartoonish, exaggerated images, poorly edited photos that made fun of bald heads, threadbare clothes, and foster care statistics. On the final slide, they'd written in bold, flashing Comic Sans, "Meet Mr. Daniels, the discount teacher." Tyler hit the lights. Malik clicked play. And it began. At first, the class was quiet, unsure of what they were seeing. Then the first image flashed, a photo of a cartoon teacher crying under a bridge, captioned with, "Spent all my money on chalk and dreams." Someone let out a snort. Then a louder laugh. And then the room exploded. Desks shook with the force of students hitting them mid-cackle. One kid actually fell out of his chair, tears streaming from his eyes. Phones came out. Some started recording, others snapping pictures of Mr. Daniels standing at the front of the room, the slideshow still playing behind him. For the students, it was performance art. For the bullies, it was a masterpiece. But Mr. Daniels didn't flinch. He stood silently, his hands resting gently on the edge of the desk. He watched the images play like someone watching raindrops hit a window, not with fear or embarrassment, but with something else. Something softer. When the final slide blinked on the screen and the class finally caught its breath, Mr. Daniels walked over to the projector, clicked it off, and turned on the lights. The laughter died in his silence. He looked around the room slowly, his eyes not angry, not even disappointed. Just tired. Familiar. Like someone who had seen this exact performance more times than anyone should have to. He tapped the desk twice and then spoke, not loud, not bitter, just clear and steady. "Thank you," he said, his voice gentle. "Thank you for showing me who needs the most love today." Silence. The room didn't know how to respond. The bullies looked at one another, confused. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They expected yelling, detention threats, maybe even tears. But this man, this so-called discount teacher, wasn't breaking. He was seeing right through them. And that was somehow worse. The day after the slideshow incident, the classroom felt different. Quieter. The laughter had vanished, replaced by a sort of awkward uncertainty that buzzed in the air like static. Mr. Daniels walked in as he always did, calm, collected, carrying that same weathered briefcase and wearing the same unshakable half-smile. He didn't mention what had happened. No lectures. No grudges. He simply greeted the class and began teaching like nothing had occurred. But underneath the surface, something had shifted. For the students, especially the ones involved in the prank, the silence was louder than any punishment could have been. They weren't used to being ignored after pulling a stunt. They weren't used to being forgiven. The next period, during free reading, Alyssa, one of the quieter students, was shelving books in the back of the class. She had always been the observer, the kind of student who noticed things others missed. While pushing a worn paperback into place, her eyes caught on a thin, dusty book wedged behind a stack of forgotten encyclopedias. Curious, she pulled it out. The spine cracked when she opened it, and tucked inside was a folded piece of yellowed newspaper. She unfolded it gently and scanned the headline. "From Foster Kid to Fulbright Scholar, a story of survival and second chances." Her eyes widened as she saw the picture beneath the headline. It was Mr. Daniels, younger, clean-shaven, thinner, but unmistakably him. He stood in front of a podium, accepting an award, tears in his eyes and a hand over his heart. The article was long, but Alyssa read every word. It told the story of a boy who had been abandoned at age 6, shuffled through 11 foster homes before his 18th birthday, often sleeping in shelters or on friends' couches. A boy who used public libraries as a refuge from the chaos, who studied by flashlight in group homes, who worked part-time jobs to buy second-hand textbooks. It spoke of how he earned a scholarship to a small college, where he studied psychology and education because he wanted to understand pain, and then help others through it. He'd been awarded a Fulbright grant to teach in under-resourced schools overseas before returning home, determined to work in classrooms where no one else wanted to. Alyssa held the article like it was sacred. She turned to look at Mr. Daniels, who was helping a student quietly in the front. He had never mentioned any of this. No big speech, no proud posters or awards on the wall. Just him. Showing up every day, calm, kind, steady. By the end of class, the article had circulated from desk to desk. Phones were snapping photos. Eyes were wide. Whispers filled the room, not the mocking kind this time, but soft, uncertain ones. Did you see this? This is really him. He went through all that. Why didn't he say anything? Tyler, the same boy who had organized the slideshow, sat slouched in his seat, staring at the article on his phone. His jaw clenched, but he didn't say a word. For the first time, he wasn't the center of attention, and he didn't want to be. Something in the story cracked the hard shell he wore like armor. Because suddenly, the man at the front of the room wasn't just a target. He was a survivor. Someone who'd endured more than any prank could touch. The following Monday, something subtle had changed in the air. Mr. Daniels walked into the classroom as usual, briefcase in hand, soft smile in place, but the way the students looked at him was different now. Less guarded. Less amused. There was no whispering, no stifled laughter. Even Tyler and his crew, normally loud and restless, sat unusually still. The article had done something none of them expected. It had made the teacher human. Real. Mr. Daniels began class not with a lecture or a quiz, but with a single prompt written on the board: what do you wish someone understood about you? No explanation. No instructions. Just that. He let the silence settle over the room before he spoke. I don't want names, he said quietly. I don't want perfect grammar. I don't even want full sentences. Just truth. Something honest. Something you carry. You can write it. Or draw it. Or say nothing at all. It's your choice. The students looked around, unsure. But slowly, they began to reach for paper. Malik was the first to start writing. His head low, his pencil moving fast. Then Alyssa. Then the girl with blue hair, biting her lip as she scribbled something quickly and folded it before anyone could see. Even Tyler tapped his pen against his desk for a while, then, almost reluctantly, began to write. For 15 minutes, the room was silent except for the sound of pencils scratching against paper and a few sniffles that no one dared to acknowledge. The tough kids, the quiet ones, the always joking ones, they were all writing. And what they wrote wasn't what anyone expected. One by one, Mr. Daniels collected the folded pages and placed them into a small wooden box he kept on the edge of his desk. He didn't read them out loud. He didn't ask for volunteers. He just stood there, his hands resting on top of the box, and said, "This is your truth. And I promise it's safe here." Then something happened. Jordan, usually the loudest of the three pranksters, raised his hand. Slowly. Awkwardly. Mr. Daniels nodded. Jordan's voice cracked a little when he spoke. Mine said, "I wish someone knew I haven't seen my dad in 5 years. And every time I hear a garage door open, I think maybe it's him. Even though I know it's not." The room went still. He looked down, embarrassed, but no one laughed. Tyler, who hadn't spoken all class, leaned forward and said, "Mine said I wish people knew that I act like I don't care, but I actually care too much. Like, it hurts sometimes." Another pause. Then Malik added quietly, "Mine was just. I wish someone knew that when I make people laugh, it's because I'm scared they'll hate me if I don't." Mr. Daniels didn't move. He didn't need to. The room had shifted on its own. Not because of discipline or fear, but because the masks they wore had started to crack. And behind them were kids who weren't mean or cruel, they were hurting. And they didn't know how else to show it. The final bell rang that day with a softer kind of energy. The usual rush to the door was slower, more thoughtful. A few students lingered by their desks, glancing toward the front of the room where Mr. Daniels sat quietly packing up papers into his briefcase. No one had spoken about the raw honesty that had poured out during the previous class period, but something had undeniably settled into the room, a kind of mutual understanding, fragile but real. Most of the students filtered out one by one, offering shy nods or quiet thank yous that didn't need explanation. Mr. Daniels returned each gesture with a smile, never pushing for more. Then, just as the last student stepped out into the hallway, 3 shadows remained. Tyler, Malik, and Jordan stood by the door, silent and unsure. They didn't look like the confident, sharp-tongued boys who had run the classroom with jokes and smirks. They looked like boys who had something they didn't know how to say. Mr. Daniels didn't acknowledge them right away. He gave them space, pretending to fuss with the zipper on his briefcase as if he didn't notice their hesitation. Finally, Tyler cleared his throat. "Mr. Daniels," he said, barely above a whisper. Mr. Daniels looked up. "Yes." The 3 boys looked at each other. Malik nudged Jordan, who rolled his eyes but took a step forward. Jordan started, rubbing the back of his neck, "we just wanted to, you know. About that slideshow. The stupid one." Tyler interrupted, his voice steadier. "It wasn't cool. We thought it was funny, but it wasn't. And we're sorry." Malik nodded. "We didn't know. About your story. About all of it." Mr. Daniels didn't say anything right away. He just looked at them, not with judgment, not with pity, but with a kind of quiet grace that made all 3 shift uncomfortably. "We were just trying to act tough," Tyler admitted. "I mean, you came in here all calm and nice, and we thought, we could break you. Like we broke the others." Jordan let out a nervous laugh, but it died quickly. "Guess that didn't really work." Mr. Daniels closed his briefcase and stood. He walked around his desk until he was just a few feet away from the boys. He didn't tower over them. He didn't lean in. He just stood there, the same way he had stood in front of the classroom on the first day, calm, steady, present. "You didn't break me," he said softly. "You reminded me why I came here." The boys looked at him, confused. "I came here for kids like you. Kids who think they have to hurt before they can be heard. Who push people away before they can be left behind." His voice didn't waver. "And I forgive you. Not because you asked. But because I know what it feels like to be angry at a world that doesn't seem to care." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Malik took a step closer, his voice quieter than the others. "Can we, start over?" Mr. Daniels smiled, the kind of smile that reaches the eyes and softens everything around it. He extended his hand. Malik shook it first. Then Jordan. Then Tyler. Each one of them stood a little straighter afterward, like a weight had been lifted they hadn't realized they were carrying.